Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's topic. We will be discussing cannabis coming to New York City and New York State. Today, your host will be Kenny Mellors, that's me, myself, and I'm joined by my two wonderful colleagues.
Desmond Lewis from the Bronx Community Foundation.
And Gustavo McLean from SoBro.
So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. You know, this is a very touchy subject that's right now in the city and the state. I'll just start by giving out some historical context. You know, we know the historic impact of cannabis has been detrimental to our community, you know, predominantly to minorities, people of color. Many of our own family and friends have been previously arrested, charged, or affected by cannabis to the point where they can't even find a job. Right. And that's important. As we may know, the first round of licenses have been given out to, if I'm not mistaken, 36 people, correct? Mm-hmm. Many folks want to get licensed, but applying for this license, they'll be exposing their activities to the government without any guarantee of even getting approved. Mm-hmm. So this is a risky transition for people, for a group of people who derive their livelihoods from this plant, and it still remains illegal on a federal standpoint. Yeah. So that's why we are here today, gathered to just get some information out there to the community and make sure that, you know, the people are getting informed. So I'll start off. What are some opportunities that, you know, in terms of business and workforce that are available to people of color in the cannabis industry?
I mean, I think, you know, cannabis is new. It's the fastest growing industry in the U.S. right now. I think the opportunities that we have in cannabis are the same opportunities that we have in most industrial manufacturing jobs. Yeah. We can look at security, for example. You know, this is a new industry that's going to need IT equipment, technology. We're going to need customer service, the point of sales, you know, all those specific trainings that we need for traditional jobs. Cannabis is going to need every single one of them, along with specific cannabis training.
Right. And I think when you define opportunity in cannabis, the great thing about New York is opportunity in cannabis starts off with people of color. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so New York is the first state in the country to really prioritize, minority, women-owned businesses, veterans, distressed farmers, and most importantly, people who've been disproportionately impacted by cannabis. Mm-hmm. So people who've been formerly incarcerated or convicted. Yeah. And so there's been no industry, certainly in our lifetime, and we're all around the same age, that has really started off by saying, we're gonna give opportunity first to communities like the Bronx. Yeah. And that's why we think from the Bronx Community Foundation standpoint, we should be prioritizing the education of what this industry could bring to our community.
I agree. And, you know, just to give some statistics, I mean, just from the passing of it in the second quarter of 2018, about 2,600 people were arrested with possession of marijuana.
New York is the arrest capital of the world.
Exactly.
And the Bronx is the capital of New York City. Right?
Exactly.
Right. So.
And in the first quarter of this year, only 35 arrests resulted out of that. You know, that's an almost 99% decrease in that, and that means less colored folks are being arrested, creating more opportunities in the long run. So with that being said, what are some educational or work training that needs to happen for people to even get in this industry?
I think when we think about cannabis, we have to start with safety. You know, this is a new industry, and the same guidelines that we traditionally use for traditional jobs, OSHA, the Department of Labor, those are the same parameters that we want to start with. We want to make sure that people are not only educated in the safety parameters around cannabis, but we want to make sure they understand sort of the long-term education expectations of cannabis. We want to start off with safety, but then we want to go into specific, you know, credentialing. You know, are we looking at, you know, bud tenders? Are we looking at, like we said earlier, security guards? You know, are we giving those individuals, again, we're not looking to talk about specifically graduate programs or undergraduate programs. We're looking to talk about certifications, credentials that will get individuals jobs so that we can build career pathways to get more money, to get more education, where we start to go into careers with degrees versus certifications.
And what are some skills or training, you know, to follow up that question that may be required by the industry for a person to even be considered?
I think, first of all, background.
Yeah.
With this being specifically for us, we want to make sure that our backgrounds meet the criteria that the job has. You know, when we're talking about cannabis, it's still scheduled. You know, we know where it is, Schedule 1. So that, you know, allows a lot of individuals not to partake in job interviews in this industry altogether. So we want to start there, but I think specifically thinking about cannabis, getting into credentialing for the specific training track that you want to get in, the bud tenders, we're talking about the security guards, we're talking about the sanitation, we're talking about any area of cannabis that allows you a certification versus a degree is where we want to start off, which is where we start off with our vocational training here at SoBro.
Awesome. I think the other thing is you don't need a license, like a cannabis license to get a job in the industry, right? Like people always attach themselves to getting a license to a business, but to your point, like to work in the lighting part or the sanitation or all these ancillary businesses, right? You don't need to do that. You can just jump straight in as long as you get training and certification, right?
Yeah, so, and the ancillary businesses are where we want to start out, specifically with us.
Yes.
Non-flower touches.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's where we, as people of color,
Absolutely.
we have the best opportunity to get in. When we're thinking about the jobs that we can jump right in without having a ton of education, but also there's not a lot of parameters around the legality of it, is the ancillary business. So it's the sanitation, it's the disinfecting, it's the going into security, as we talked about,
the
technology, the lighting, the consulting.
Yeah.
Those are the areas that we want to think about collectively as people of color, because we can get into those jobs without a lot of hangups.
And I think the other piece is, sorry, I know you got a lot of questions.
It's all right. I love it.
I think the ancillary businesses are important. I also always like emphasizing that we want those licenses too.
Yeah.
I think there's some, the statistics is like 2 to 3% of the total cannabis industry are owned by people of color.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah. If you think about an industry that has hurt us the most,
right?
We should be out there getting licensed. So the message to the community is go get those licenses. Yeah. But also, if you don't want to, there are significant job opportunities in the non-plant touching areas of this industry.
And social equity and the equitable ownership is the reason why New York City is slower than California and Massachusetts. They're taking their time because they are specifically looking at how we can get people of color to get into these fields, not just as workers, but as owners. And that's what's taking us a little bit longer than some of the other states.
And something that you both touched on is just getting in the industry alone. What are some related fees that maybe a person, a minority may need to know for them to even start in the industry? An operation, is there any financing available for those opportunities?
Yeah, so if you're gonna go get a license, the first fee is the licensing fee. So right now for the conditional adult, it's not that, it's reasonably is about $2,500, if I recall, is the total cost. But we don't know what the next round of licensing fees are going to be. OCM will probably come out with that in the beginning of the year. But it's not. It's a costly activity, right? I think people need to understand to start a cannabis business is going to require fundraising. It's going to require some lending. It's going to require some equity financing. On average, to start a dispensary is about $1 million. It's about people say anywhere between $1 to $1.5 million to start a dispensary. But there are opportunities for people to raise money, and so people need to be very educated on what that means. Of course, that's the dispensary side. If you look at a cultivation, it's multiples of that. But there are ways in which you can get into the industry without having to. People hear those numbers and maybe they get worried. There are opportunities to get funding and financing if you want to start a licensed cannabis business.
I mean, just to go to that point, people may get worried when they hear these substantial amount of funds that need to be brought into the market just to even start. Because the industry is also not recognized federally, that means, entrepreneurs, business owners will have to turn to other alternative methods, whether it's a credit union, CDFI. So what programs or maybe institutions out there are helping these people to actually get these financing for that?
So you're right.
Or is that even available?
Yeah, so you're right. So if you're a federally regulated financial institution, it's difficult for you to get into the space because of what was mentioned. It's a class 1 drug, right? Yeah. So there are those state-funded or state-owned or state-chartered, as we would call it, institutions that are out there. And there are some sort of neo-banks, online banks that do kind of, don't fall under the charter of a federal agency that can provide funding. So Ponce Bank is a great one in the Bronx and in the city. They are looking to go into this space and provide bank accounts and potentially credit services to people creating cannabis businesses. They haven't launched their program yet, but we know that they are very interested. There are other state-owned institutions as well. OCM is probably going to come out with a list of organizations in New York State that will be able to, people will be able to open a bank account and hopefully get some financing. But a lot of this funding is going to come from private financing. Right. Yeah. So individuals, maybe it's your family member, maybe a lot of people raise their money from their family first. And so try to go in sort of, your friends groups, raise little bits of money here and there to get you going. But just recognize it is going to take some level of financing.
Absolutely. Of course. While we're on the topic of just equity and, our people taking advantage of this opportunity, one thing that it's hard to pass on and to even think of is, people who were affected by this, by criminal records and things of that nature. How does someone with a record from cannabis get that expunged? How far back do they go? Let's say like 80s, 90s when this war on drugs was started.
Yeah.
How can they go about that? What's that process like?
So New York State did something pretty unique as well, in that expungements are automatic.
Okay.
So you don't really have to do anything because all of the records for certain, obviously penal codes.
Yeah.
Right, because not everyone was covered under the MRTA, and so, but your expungement is automatic. You should go to your, local court wherever you were arraigned or convicted to go and get your records. You should be able to identify what your records are and automatically get them removed.
Right.
But again, New York State did something pretty unique. You don't have to really do anything. It's just an automatic thing that happens. And then, of course, we're trying to push at the federal level.
Right.
Biden recently made some announcements. It wasn't automatic. It wasn't fully expansive.
Right.
But people who don't have state convictions and federal convictions, we're pushing for that level of change in the regulations.
Of course. And something that just comes with that topic is this negative connotation that the cannabis has in our communities, whether it's from our family, from our friends, employers, things of that nature, even business owners. So how should we prepare our community for this new opportunity, considering that there's this negative connotation around cannabis?
I think education, when you bring in destigmatization, is the most important thing. Is one of the things I think is most important. We can't have a conversation about cannabis if you don't truly understand it. And one of the things we're talking about here, we're talking about workforce placement and jobs. Hemp bricks are some of the best things to build a house with. So if you don't know that, then you don't know to look for a career, even if you've been in construction for 20 years. And so understanding, not just the recreational aspect, allow people to make their own choices. But when we start to have conversation around what truly cannabis does, not just for us as individuals, but for the environment, these are conversations, cannabis is a recyclable, toxin, meaning that as soon as it's done, it's not going to go back into the earth and pollute 1,000 rivers.
Correct.
Right.
And so having those conversations with people, making sure they understand, hey, I've been in sanitations for 20 years and I've been hauling, crappy chemicals. Now I can take a non-hazardous toxin, as my specialty, and I can make, $70,000 versus 30.
Absolutely.
Having that education, preparing our communities, places like SoBro, where we, harbor on vocational, and manufacturing and instructional design is where we come in and we have those conversations to educate the community so that we're not ignorant to really not just the recreational aspects of cannabis, but truly all the environmental benefits that cannabis can pose for us collectively.
Yeah, and I mean, fundamentally, cannabis is a plant.
Yeah.
I know, but our community is, everyone is not for, cannabis, right? And so I think to Gustavo's point, we need to educate people on what this means, from a construction and commercial standpoint, from a medicinal standpoint, from an entrepreneurship standpoint, from an educational standpoint, housing security, food insecurity. Cannabis has so much relevance across so many different areas and industries.
Right.
We just need to tell people what those opportunities are, and hopefully they will see the benefits, right? Not everyone does.
Right.
I think we also have to recognize that. We're coming up against people who have big stigmas you're never going to change. Education is always the importance to make sure people are informed in their decision making. And then, hopefully we positively move forward from there.
Cannabis is here. It's in every single city, state.
It's not going anywhere.
And whether, we collectively here in the Bronx Society, where we wanted to support it, it's going to be here. And we can allow our, constituents, our participants, our residents to go to another borough to purchase it, but it's going to be purchased. And so educating individuals, making sure they understand specifically, not only just, the recreational aspect, it really does change the thought process around it.
For sure.
And when it comes to thought process and things like that, I'm pretty sure this is a question that almost every regular New Yorker asks themselves. And just for clarity, can an everyday New Yorker get arrested for cannabis today in the state of New York?
No, I'm not going to say you can't get arrested. But there are specific parameters around cannabis in New York State. The amount that you actually have to have is 3 ounces before you can be arrested. It's still, again, federally. And federal law will always, supersede state if it all boils down to it. So there are parameters around the decriminalization. You can't smoke outside. You can't be on a federal property. You can't be under the age of 21. These are the things to be very specific about, because if you don't follow those rules and expectations, then arrest, if not today could potentially be tomorrow. So it's not about, can you get arrested? Are you following the parameters around the decriminalization to make sure that you're not in the pathways? Because you can get fines even, in a decriminalized state.
Absolutely.
One thing that you had mentioned earlier when we were discussing is just, and it's important that I think you mentioned is just the tool if you were arrested twice. Or something like that.
So if you're, I think if don't 100% quote me, but I think if you're fined twice, then you can be arrested after being fined twice. So for example, if you're out partying, you're out in a club and you receive one ticket for consumption, and then you get another ticket the next week, if they pull it up that this is your second time, being fined for cannabis, you could potentially be arrested.
That makes sense. We want to protect the environment, want to protect our children, something that we always want to look forward to. So I wanted to switch the conversation a little bit just in terms of legislature, because this is something that's still being reviewed overall. So can you give us a high-level explanation or description on how cannabis licensing, what the process is like right now in the state of New York?
Yeah, so the only licensing process right now that's available is called the Conditional Adult Use Retail Dispensary License, or CARD is colloquially as people call it. The other licensing processes will be announced by the time this video is recorded. But right now it's CARD, and the OCM just released their initial regulations around dispensaries and some of the other license types that are going to be coming out, like producers, manufacturers, cultivators. But the CARD license process that just concluded was a pretty unique, again, to Gustavo's point, New York State doing it different, unique in that it wasn't as arduous as an application that we thought it was going to be. That does not mean that the other licenses types will not be.
Right.
It was really primarily focused on your former incarceration or impact in terms of where you're arrested, how you're arrested. It was focused on who's a part of your organization and ownership, what's called TPI or third-party interests. Was also another big part. It was also focused on sort of your ability to run a business. And they defined that as being profitable for 2 years. Were you profitable for 2 years over the last couple of years since the MRTA? And then did you have a significant presence in New York State? The other license types, we are not sure at the moment what those processes are going to be about, but we know what some of the regulations are. We're in commentary period. Commentary period will be done by the time this video airs as well. So hopefully we can have a round 2 of this conversation in the future and talk about that.
Of course. So as I mentioned earlier, we already had the first round of licenses given out. Congratulations to those 36, business owners and things like that.
Desmond for all of his support.
Thanks for Desmond and his support.
Cannabis Hub and the Bronx Community Foundation.
Of course.
You're a big part of that, man. That's a big feat. Congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great job. You're changing the culture around us, man.
Thank you.
So one thing that we heard is that the state is awarding 175 licenses this round. This is a really short question. Is that going to be the set number? Is there a parameter around this? Is there a limit? Things of that nature?
Yeah, this is a great question, and everyone's been talking about it. So right now, OCM's view is there'll be no cap on licenses. There's opinions as to whether that's a good thing or not. But right now, OCM's view is they don't want to restrict the number of licenses. They want to see how things progress. It could be that they do it in the future, but there's no restrictions right now on the number of licenses they're going to issue.
And that speaks to New York's, specific thought process around social justice and equity within this. A lot of states who have decriminalized or legalized cannabis has tried to figure out ways to make that social, justice equity program fit. And, and they've done things like offer a less expensive license or multiple license to, to one individual. But New York is being very specific in that. And I think that's a good idea when it comes to cannabis.
And to that point, social equity in cannabis hasn't really worked in any other state. Right. I think that's important to know that New York is doing it different because they're learning from what other states have done. I don't use the word wrong, but more like what other states have fallen short on. And so they're doing something no state's ever done before. And therefore, a lot of things are going to be moving and changing as they learn. But one thing they're trying to do is ensure that social equity works in New York.
It's a big part of if you want a business license, it has to be a commitment there somewhere.
Of course. And I think it's only right, there's something for the long haul. And you need to make sure that the players and the team around it is going to make sure that they're in there for the full time,
For sure.
Which leads to my next question: how complicated is it to get a cannabis license? You know?
Well, I mean, I could talk from just just knowledge of other states, right? Because
Yeah.
again, New York's cannabis. Well, let me. The current regulations that were issued by New York were extensive. There's 200 and something pages long, very complex. One of the reasons why the Bronx Community Foundation does our educational work is because of this, because it's a complex process to understand.
Right.
You have to know what your physical build out's going to look like, what your security systems are, how you're packaging and securing product, how many people are working and the type of people that are working in the dispensary. We're talking primarily around retail now, right? There's just so many different compliance elements, how you're weighing, cleaning, disposing of the product afterwards. So it is, people akin it to running a pharmacy, right? And so it is complicated, but it's not insurmountable. And I think that's the key bit. We don't want to scare people away from the industry, but people need to know that there is a lot involved, and you have to be very educated, because the little non-compliance situation, you could lose your license.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we are still dealing with a drug at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Right?
And I think that's what people, being pro-cannabis does not mean that you're anti, structure.
Yes.
And I think that this is one of the things that we have to be very specific about with structure, not just because, the scheduling, but because, cannabis in young people, could be reckless. It could be something that's very detrimental to young people. So we want to be promoting, cannabis for 21-year-old adults education and as much as we can take it, but we also want to be very specific, like you were saying earlier, because a lot of the thought process around cannabis is the medicinal, where we treat cleaning like a laboratory. We go in, we talk about food safety. We create that area for, the same things that we worry about in a traditional restaurant, because we could, get people sick, people could get hurt.
Yeah.
So we want to be very pro, but we also want to be very thoughtful about the things that can actually happen if we aren't.
Absolutely.
That all makes sense. And when it comes to, just running a business in general, one of the things that they always tell you is get insurance. What do you know of any insurance companies right now that are covering the cannabis industry? I know it may be very small, but there's some information on that.
There are some insurance companies, I couldn't name them right now, but there are smaller companies, more niche companies that are in the space, right? Because cannabis is to some extent a niche business for that industry. In the same way it's pretty niche for financial services right now. But there are insurance companies out there. You're not going to find the big national provider, like AIG or Liberty Mutual or any of these places doing it. But there are some smaller players in the space doing it.
And that comes back to what you were talking about originally. That's a new business. That's
correct.
That's where we're.
That's an ancillary business opportunity.
That's exactly what we're talking about. People who have career changers, who have worked in an insurance company for 20 years, that want to change careers. This is where we come in as SoBro to have those conversations about the opportunities that individuals have.
Of course. And something that you both covered already is just the difference of what New York City and the state is looking to do. Are there any other thoughts that come to your mind when it comes to comparing New York State to other states on how we're approaching it when it comes to the cannabis industry?
I think the social equity we talked about earlier is the biggest piece. When you look at California and you look at how many large companies actually own so much of the cannabis industry there, even places like Massachusetts that aren't too old, they haven't taken some of the slow pace that we have in New York to make sure that, minorities, people of color, not only get business license, but we understand what's coming down the pipeline. If you go to the OCM website, if you go to the WDI and Cornell website, they're very specific about training, about what's happening, what's coming down the pipeline, but also what's expected of you if you're looking to get into the cannabis industry. And I don't think a lot of other states are taking that type of step. They're allowing the businesses to sort of cater to the employee and the employer versus New York is saying, this is what we want you to understand about cannabis. And as you're saying, they're coming down the pipeline. We know that because, they're letting us know when these things are happening, which is not the same in a lot of other states.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of other unique things New York's doing is New York's built what's called a two-tier system, meaning like you can't be vertically integrated in New York. You can't be a producer and a seller of cannabis at the same time. And that's pretty unique. I think there's maybe one or two other states in the country that do that. And the reason being is New York wants the cannabis industry to be a small business industry. And they don't want large, what are called, multi-state operators or MSOs to come into the state and control the economy. And so it's controversial. It's super controversial. But OCM is coming from the right place, I think, to say, we want our small businesses, our minority-owned businesses, our women-led businesses to have a chance. And so we're going to not let people own the entire ecosystem.
Of course.
So that's one big thing. There's a couple other small things, like you could be 18 years or older to work in a dispensary. That's pretty unique,
Perfect.
right? I don't think Massachusetts does that. I don't know many other states that do that. I'm sure there are, but I don't know many others. So you cannot work in front of house though. If you're 18 years old, you can work at the back of the house.
Okay.
You have to be 21 years or older to just to hand a product
That's
to a
absolutely
consumer.
right.
But that's pretty unique, right? If you think about internships and people of age come and don't want to go to college, maybe they want to go right into the industry.
Yeah.
That's a huge
But
opportunity.
it also
right?
speaks to people that do want to go to college.
Yes.
Right now, one of the things is we talked earlier about just what cannabis is and how it affects our communities. But we think about young people, you grow tomatoes just like you grow cannabis.
Correct.
When you're
Correct.
using it digitally.
Exactly.
Yes.
There's no difference. So we have those pipeline programs where we can say we have a digital agriculture program here at SoBro. And if you're 18 years old, SUNY, CUNY are offering these programs, which they're doing, which again
absolutely.
is different than most states.
Yes.
New York City, I think, is the first state in the country to actually have a master's and bachelor's approved cannabis program.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
That's a huge
when
deal.
you think
Huge.
about, the opportunities that come from that, but also more speaking specific to our communities. We can say, you don't have to go get a degree in something you're not interested in. We know that cannabis is prevalent in our communities, but also the education, the knowledge, the jobs behind it are specifically what New York State is making sure that we stay in front of.
The other thing New York's doing, just final point, I know you want to get to your next question, is around, it is social equity, but it is around dedicating real dollars to communities disproportionately impacted, or CDIs.
Giving
So
back.
40% of New York State's revenues are going to go to communities impacted. That's a huge amount of resources coming to our community. And so we want to see this industry be successful just because of that alone. But for many other reasons, 60 to 100,000 jobs come into the state within this industry as well. But that real kind of grassroots revenue generating commitment to communities of color or communities disproportionately impacted is huge. Absolutely. And that's a huge revenue. That's a huge opportunity for funding for the Bronx, right?
Of course. Something that you both touched on, I'm glad you mentioned that about an 18-year-old being able to work on the back end but not the front end.
Yeah.
Our youth, and this is just something that's going to come to question a lot when it comes to employers doing interviews and things like that, because as we keep mentioning, it's a new market.
Absolutely.
If a young person has cannabis training on their resume, what can be expected? Would that be deterring other industries?
I think it depends on, the individual and what type of experience you're bringing. Cannabis is a new industry, and if you have cannabis on your resume, it should be a strong, it should be a strong certification, and you should be looking to specifically work or at least apply for, employment in that industry.
Right.
It is comes with a huge negative impact. When we think about, when we talk about negative impact, we're talking about recreational usage. When we're talking about cannabis resume, you should have at least 3 resumes anyway. You should have a resume, that talks about cannabis maybe or maybe not. These are the things that we, specifically at SoBro, we want to make sure we get ahead of, because workforce development, workforce planning, that's kind of what we're here for. The industry is brand new. And so young people don't actually know what should go on a resume. But cannabis is a new industry, but it also requires specific certification and training that needs to be labeled on your resume.
Of course. And this just leads to just the different opportunities. We kind of touched up on it a little bit. What are some of the ancillary, business or employment opportunities that will come out of the cannabis industry? Like we mentioned, insurance, security,
Insurance, accounting,
Consulting,
business
technology,
consulting,
surveillance.
lighting, sanitation, security. There's
Education,
a whole,
teaching.
teaching. There'll be training services. Think of
This is no different than plastic.
correct. It's like
This is no different than the
any
plastic
major
industry.
industry, every required position is going to be recreated for this industry.
right?
And so there is a huge non-plant touching opportunities that people can look at if they feel as though going into a licensed business is too complicated,
Right.
Yeah.
or they're just not interested. Like licensed business isn't for everyone.
Yeah.
It really isn't. And so you don't have to be going that direction. You could choose to go to any of these other associated or ancillary type businesses.
such a wide spectrum when it comes to the opportunities available, you know, from growing to actually selling, distributing, and things like that.
Delivery, the
Exactly.
delivery,
all sorts-
cleaning,
Exactly. Yeah.
cleaning, disposing of it.
It's just crazy to see how many opportunities are going to come out of that.
But when you think about New York City specifically, like where are we when it comes to employment? You know, industrial manufacturing, hospitality, tourism. Cannabis
Correct.
is no different.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
we start to think about, you know, general, and we talk about the training behind construction will be no different than the training behind cannabis. You will need 30 hours of OSHA. You're going to need fall prevention. You're going to need slip, trips, and falls because all those things are going to be specifically prevalent in a cannabis dispensary, in a grow house. You know, delivery guys will need, you know, all those same trainings that we're required to do now will be required for cannabis.
Yeah,
absolutely. And for the people out there that may be wanting to know, are there any positions out there currently available? You know, whether it's...
I mean, there are, you know, right now the only operators in New York State are the medical operators, right? But, you know, there will be dispensaries being opened, you know, before the end of 2020, before the end of this year. And the beginning of next year, right? We just saw this morning, sorry, I know we're dating ourselves. The first dispensary is going to be open in Harlem. That just was announced this morning, right?
Awesome.
I think it's 128th Street. And so, you know, we're moving. There are opportunities. You know, Department of Labor, OCM, they also have their own jobs right now within the cannabis. They're hiring people, right? So, people should really focus on the Department of Labor's website, the SEED team, CEED. That would be a great place. OCM's website would be a great place to go to. And then just follow, you know, you can follow the Bronx Community Foundation, follow SoBro. You know, all of our orgs should be out there talking about what job opportunities are available.
And also looking at the traditional search engines that we use. You know, Indeed, there's a ton of jobs. The same way that we would look at jobs depending on where you live. You might be able to work in Jersey. You know,
there are a lot of opportunities.
You know, there's a lot of opportunities in New Jersey because they moved a little differently. You know, they give you the experience to come back to New York. So there's a lot of opportunities when it comes to cannabis and moving around.
Just a really quick question. Something that a lot of people probably won't think of is, will this be a seasonal business? You know, for example, farmers have better seasons to grow certain things compared to other ones. So you could touch up on that.
I don't think, and you can definitely, I don't think it'll be a seasonal job. I think there's seasonal aspects of it. Meaning depending if you're growing upstate outside versus if you're going, but again, this is where we come in with the information and the knowledge. You know, this is not something that's going away, and it's not a flyby. This is a real industry with real potential for education, training, and job promotion. But more specifically, it is money. It is money, and the money comes from the opportunity that you can grow all year round. You can grow in a closet. You can also grow in a room this big. You know, that is the one of the beauties of cannabis, but it's also one of the things that makes this something that's going to sustain a lot of where other industries don't. You know, you don't need a lot of information. You just need to know how to do it. You know, and you need to be able to get in, and that's what when we're thinking seasonal, there's not the opportunity for it just not to happen.
This is probably like one of the largest generational wealth building opportunities we've seen in ever potentially, right? Because I mean, again, name an industry that's put our people first.
Exactly.
I can't think of one, right? Or where we were, you know, I name an industry where the job opportunity is so diverse. Name an industry where, you know, you can get in and really do well and employ people of color in mass scale. You know, there's not many of these opportunities, and so seasonality, I don't think is a big, you know, concern because it isn't. It, you know, obviously cultivators need to think about that, but this is just a huge opportunity. Whether you support cannabis or not, you hopefully support jobs. You hopefully support, you know, more funding coming to our community. Right? There are ways for us to identify, you know, collaboration, for us to agree on this topic. You know, and so people should really be looking and being educated about this.
Awesome. And you know, all of that ties into the future of it. So, what do you guys want to see in the future of it for the cannabis industry?
I want to see wealth in us.
Yes.
You know, I want to see a job industry that promotes us. I want an industry that allows us to be us. You know, I want to be honest and genuine about the things that we do. If there's recreational usage, I don't want people to feel nervous. If you're using it medicinally, I don't want people to feel nervous. I want us to be able to get up and to be honest about an industry that's honest about the work that we do and the commitment that we bring to it. I don't want it to be a thing where we're second thought with cannabis, like we are in most industries in the U.S. I think this is an opportunity for us when we look at, the reason why cannabis and the whys and the why nots. We know for a fact that there's not real reason why this isn't something that's promoted. We know environmentally this works for us.
Right.
So I think for me to see us at a place, and I say us specifically, people of color, where we can come into an industry that's us. We don't have to shape shift or, change. We can come in as us. We can sit at the table and be honest about what we bring to the table and still have a job that provides for our families, that provides for us, but we're happy about it. And I don't know if there's an industry 100% like that for us.
No, there isn't. And I think this is our industry. Let's just call it what it is, right?
It's just the fact of the matter.
It is our industry, and so we shouldn't be afraid to try to own this.
Right.
And so I want, It's
a very good
we should
point.
do it, right? I want to see, right now cannabis, is only owned by 2 to 3% of people of color, right? The cannabis industry. I want that to be a larger number. So that's what I'm hopefully seeing. I want to see more cannabis jobs in the Bronx. I want to see generational wealth building happening by our people owning businesses.
Of course.
These are all the same vision OCM and DASNY and many public sector agencies want. So as long as, we continue to implement the regulation in the way we want it to be, right? Because this is how other states have fell short. The regulation says one thing, the implementation, execution is different. As long as we continue to do that, then that's great. I also want to see nonprofits and community-based organizations funded through this industry to continue to do the work that the Bronx Community Foundation, SoBro, and many other orgs do in our community. So those are just some of the things that I would hope for.
Absolutely.
It's awesome.
And thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for coming out. That's about it. We're wrapping it up for the cannabis coming to New York City and New York State. Thank you. Stay tuned if there's a second part.